All right, welcome everyone. My name is Denise Demese. I'm Director of Faculty Development for the University System of Georgia. And we are so happy to have you here on a Friday afternoon for this webinar, Promoting Intellectual Engagement. And we have Beth René Roepnack and Amy Austin with us to talk to you about this. They're both at eCampus and have done so many amazing things to get faculty ready for what has been the craziness of fall semester, and they're going to help us move forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Thank you, Denise. Good morning, and thank you all for coming to our webinar this morning. Today, Beth René Roepnack and I will present information about promoting intellectual engagement and how to create excitement about learning in an online environment. Again, my name is Amy Austin, and I'm the Director of USG eCampus Online Faculty Development. I've been with eCampus now for 2 years, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to present today. I have the lovely pleasure of presenting with my colleague, Beth René Roepnack. Beth René is an online faculty mentor with 20+ years of experience in online teaching, and she's also QM certified. And guys, before we jump in, I just want to say today is a very special day for me as well, because I have a 21-year-old. And I know I look so young. I'm way too young to have a 21-year-old. But so yes, today is a great day, and I'm just happy to be here with you guys. So we're going to talk about active learning. We're going to talk about high impact practices and strategies for crafting and selecting engaging student activities. We will also leave you with specific examples and tips for creating an intellectually engaging activity. So you've moved your course totally online. How do you inspire the same level of creative excitement about discovering connections, exploring insights, and working together to construct deep understanding of material? In this session, we'll provide you with guidelines for specific strategies for creating the environment that supports intellectual engagement and exploration into your asynchronous online course. Thus far, all of the USG fall webinars have something in common. The theme throughout all merge upon this notion that we have to employ different strategies and tactics in order to provide a high quality learning experience in the online platform. So let's talk about what intellectual engagement means and how that translates to getting students to actively participate in their learning. So what we would like for you to do is to just take a few minutes. We want to get your input. If you would, in the chat, tell us what intellectual engagement looks like. And then in just a few words, tell us what intellectual engagement means to you. I'm looking at the chat, I'm waiting. All right, some things are starting to come in. Asking insightful questions, excitement about ideas, participating in discussions, asking questions, yes, absolutely. Critical thinking, yes, definitely. Curiosity, yes. Ongoing participation. They definitely want to be able to apply their information to the real world, absolutely. Wow, these are all great comments. Just look at a few more. Playing with ideas introduced in the course, listening to feedback, yes. Absolutely. So it looks like some great ideas here. Absolutely.
So when we were doing, we did some research and we came up with a lot of the same thing that you did, you know, about it challenging and asking the questions and getting them, you know, engaged creatively and so on. And so thank you for sharing your ideas, and we'll sort of move on to some other research.
Absolutely. In addition to the characteristics of engaging tasks that provide in the previous slides, Jacobson, Locke, and Friesen also looked at essential engaging tasks. Instructors who want to engage their students, and they want to also balance the structure so that students know what they need to do with openness and freedom to promote students' creativity. Research indicates that the way people are learning has evolved, especially over the last decade or so. And it suggests that students learn best when they're able to participate in activities that pique their interest and challenge their thinking. That said, it's important for faculty to incorporate teaching strategies that will allow for action and engagement. Thus, engaged teaching will involve modeling, coaching, scaffolding to get students to the level to which they need to be so that we're able to provide them with formative feedback to further support their learning. Effective formative feedback will support academic rigor and help students meet required standards. Students need guidance from faculty, and they are eager and need to understand what they can do to be successful as they pursue their educational goals. So students need substantive and timely feedback. Over to you, Beth René.
The community of inquiry model really supports this notion of engaged teaching and a lot of the things that we've talked about. And this model has been going strong for 20 years now, and it stresses the importance of social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence for students to have a complete educational experience. Most of us, when we make the transition to online, we get the cognitive presence, the teaching presence, that part comes pretty naturally. But that social presence is something that we have to make a real effort to do. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And we really urge you, if you haven't had a chance to see the previous webinars in this series on creating community and engaging with your students, they really serve as a foundation for the intellectual engagement that we're going to talk about today, because students really need to feel safe in your classroom and feel like they belong and that they're part of a group. And so definitely spend the time to get to know your students and develop those connections. And those other webinars were really great. So here's a plug for them. All right, Amy.
Thank you. So what is active learning? So you can see here that Prince defines active learning as the method by which instructors involve students in their learning process. And the way they do this is by intentionally creating assignments and activities which require students to process and think about what they're doing. Before we jump into teaching and learning methods, I want to talk about the topic of teaching philosophy. Your approach to teaching, whether it's online or face-to-face, is based on your philosophical view. What are your assumptions about the online student? The truth is, your teaching philosophy for face-to-face may need to be slightly adjusted so that it's more adaptable for engaging and reaching students in your online environment. Once you have examined and quite possibly tweaked your philosophy, you'll be ready to dive into learning more about engagement theories, high impact practices, and designing your course. There are several types of teaching and learning methods. Traditional teaching methods, i.e. face-to-face, typically are based on the lecture exam pedagogy and is teacher-centered with the instructor at the focal point. In contrast, the active learning method of teaching places the student at the center of the experience. Riggs and Linder noted that active learning experiences are student-centered, and generally the two have an additional component. They require meaningful action by the student on behalf of their learning, and meaningful action must be paired with reflection by the student regarding their learning experience. Here are just a few references from the literature that support the reasons for active learning and why it's so important. The theoretical framework for active learning models stemmed from Chickering and Gamson, 7 Principles for Good Practices in Undergraduate Education for Face-to-Face Interactions. In 1998, Cursley and Snyderman proposed the engagement theory, which posits students must be profoundly involved in their course of study through interaction with others and meaningful tasks for effective learning to take place. Bonderwell and Turner did a qualitative study which was based on a theoretical framework from rich environments for active learning. Pruitt explored the application of cognitive developmental and mediated cognitive learning strategies in undergraduate online courses. And this study focused on online interactions, discussion assignments, and multimedia components. The finding of Pruitt's research indicates in part that students are more directly influenced by an instructor's intentional effort to mediate the learning process. In 2015, Dahl noted that active learning improves student engagement and improves the learning experience. And in 2017, Lemkin suggested that active learning requires authentic, deliberate, and intentional creation of design of course materials and learning activities. Engagement theories, as Beth René mentioned above, for Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, they state that teaching presence in an online course is an important factor for fostering a sense of classroom community, which in turn supports higher order thinking. Positive correlations between teaching presence and successful student learning have also been established. Active learning exercises should include elements of high impact practices. The students should expect to have the opportunity to interact with their peers and instructors, and they should also expect to invest their time and effort into their coursework so that they're successful on their academic journey. So some strategies for taking active learning online. Next slide. Like most educational practices, there isn't always a straight line for transitioning active learning to online. It's a mistake to think that one can take an activity used in the classroom and assume that it's easily transferable to the online space. Quite the contrary. Often it takes a little imagination and rethinking about how the activity will work in a virtual environment. Overall, all activities have been intentionally created to ensure that students get the most out of their learning experience. And there's a lot of research which points to the reasons for preparing and creating the architectural structure for active learning asynchronously. So things such as welcome messages, announcements, and the syllabus, all of those things are necessary. This is a recurring theme. And as you guys probably have already seen in the other webinars, most of these have been referenced in previous presentations and likely will continue to be mentioned, as it cannot be reiterated enough. We must supply our students with as much direction and support as possible. So I want to mention three main things to keep in mind when you're considering which activities will engage your students in the online space. The first thing is student support. We must provide the navigational tools to ensure that your instructions include how and where the student can find assignments. From beginning to end, we must ensure that students have the proper support necessary to successfully complete their learning activities. The second thing is quality of instruction. Instructors should be knowledgeable about the topics they're teaching, have a plethora of activities and ideas that will promote analysis, integration, and synthesis. And instructors need to be up to date on the types of technology that will promote active learning. And then the last thing is making sure that you have up-to-date technology. Understand what web-based tools are available and what tools are available within your learning management system. So when we talk about active learning assignments, back one slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. When we're talking about active learning assignments, there's several benefits for active learning. Faculty get to design robust activities, students get to decide when and how they learn, and the activities help the students build on their knowledge. So I want to spend a little time here talking about these items. In an active or participative learning environment, it's important that faculty communicate clear expectations and standards for learning assignments. Again, there's a resounding theme. Assignments need to be tilted. So there needs to be transparency in what they will learn, why it's important for the students, and how it correlates to the learning objectives and student outcomes, and how the student will be graded. Students definitely want to know how and when they're going to receive feedback. So faculty must offer consistent and robust timely feedback. Active learning assignments should be designed to allow students the opportunity to interact with the content, an opportunity to interact with their peers, and an opportunity to interact with the instructor, sorry. Although students have the opportunity to choose how they learn, faculty still need to provide students with orientation materials. So videos or voice over screen tools are available to help for creating these instructions and navigational resources. And I've compiled a list of things that you may want to include in your orientation package. And I've included that on a list that Beth René and I will supply you with. It's just a strategies and tips sheet, and that'll be forwarded to you in the reference section and after the presentation. So just a couple of things that you'll want to make sure you include in your packet. How often do students need to participate? How much time should they set aside a week to spend on their coursework? Where students can look for updates, breaking news about the course. So your announcements need to be up to date. And just information about, are there any external tools or digital courseware that's going to be required for the student? And if so, how would the student get this information? So there's several types of activities that can be used in the online environment to engage students. And this is just a picture that shows the different ways that you can engage your students in your asynchronous course. But some of the things that you can incorporate are things like gaming and avatars. And believe it or not, the use of avatars and asynchronous environments have been used to stimulate student engagement for several years. And literature suggests that the use of avatar actually can contribute to the learning experience by giving students a sense of social presence, and it helps them to invest in their learning community. With gaming, there's all types of online, you'd be surprised how many online gaming resources are out there. It's become quite popular. And I was reading an article and the author was talking about how she was watching her 12-year-old nephew play this game called Halo 2 online. And what was interesting about that was the fact that this was back in the early 2000s. And back then she even said, it's going to be amazing because this digital world is how our students are going to learn in the future. So, and again, on the resource list, I've provided several games that you all can incorporate. I know one of the most popular games now that kids play is Fortnite, and adults play that game as well. You have SimCity, you have Code Names. It's a spy game that can be tailored to fit any course. You have Dominion. You can actually play dominoes, and then Town of Salem. Some other activities that you can do, think, pair, share, virtual style, where you would pair your students into small discussion groups. You have reaction sheets that can be incorporated in your online course, and students can use those after they either view a video or participate in a virtual event. You also have reflective exercises that you can do, like online journaling, blogging, and then you can also do polling. And now I'm going to turn it over to Beth René.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate sharing the theory and a lot of the active learning exercises. A lot of the ones you mentioned are ways of setting up your course, and of course using the assignments tool. I'm going to focus on the discussion tool. And I think that active learning can happen in discussion because they have the potential to fulfill all parts of intellectually engaging tasks, with structure and freedom, deep thinking and discussion leading to deep understanding, and connecting socially into the world, and so on. But I don't think that the current discussions quite do that. And so I'm going to talk to you about two ways that you can really support your students getting more engaged in the discussions. And I was even talking to a professor yesterday who has adopted this different structure, and he said it's so much easier for him to participate in the discussion with this different structure. But first, we're going to look at the question. So when you're thinking about questions, right, you want to enliven the conversation to promote engagement and critical thinking. So I definitely will use provocative and engaging, prompts to get my students' attention. But if you only do that, then your students, they'll spout off a lot of opinions, but they won't have integrated the material into their narrative. So I found that it's really important that you require students to use material from the textbook or the assigned readings in every post, so that every argument is grounded in what they're learning. They're integrating the material into their narrative, and so they learn it a lot better that way. Now, many faculty also require students to cite the work, right, trying to get them to do this. But some research shows that when you require students to cite work, their critical thinking skills go down, because, and they, right now this is sort of theoretical, but from the comments of the students, they spent so much time worrying about the details of the reference that, they couldn't really focus on the discussion. And so what I do is for my freshman level students, I present them with the reference. Here's the inline reference, for the textbook. Here's the reference section. All you have to do is add a page number, right? And I ask them to do the page number so that I get them looking in the book, right? Because the discussions really should be a learning process. And so that has worked really well. And I'll tell you about some of the results of that a little later. Your prompt should also be multi-level, right? So it's an inclusive participatory pedagogy. Face-to-face classroom discussions are there for everyone to participate in. And so if you only have the higher order questions, some students are just not going to be able to get it at all. So make sure you have some basic questions, basic understanding, maybe applying to their lives, so that those students who are hanging on with their fingernails, trying to understand, can also participate. But the higher order questions definitely lead to the most interesting discussions. They really enliven the discussion, and you can do that by conditional phrasing is an excellent tool. What would happen if everyone, did this, if everyone, did that, or whatever. So, or you can have them relate the material to themselves, their current lives, their future lives, and their careers, society at large. Those kind of questions get them thinking sort of outside the box of the readings, and thinking about how to apply it and the implications of it. But it also in a sort of comfortable environment, which is why that connection building and community building is so important, so that students feel safe to explore the material. I am definitely not above, using a poignant vignette, a little YouTube, clip or something like that to grab their interest. But then, week one, when I'm doing the grading, I'm really stressing the importance of grounding their response, in the material that they read. I'll give them dilemmas, real world applications, and case studies. These are all questions that will really can enliven the conversation. But there's still one problem with the current, I'm sorry, one more slide. So here's an example of what I sort of did with a question. So the question on the left was a question I was given in a course to teach for eCore. List an important cultural influence in your life. How has it affected your development, right? And I got a lot of really cool stories about, grandparents from the old country and so on, but none of them connected it to the chapter. And so they were interesting, but it wasn't a learning experience very much. So what I did was I put some terms in bold. So I put development in bold, and then I mentioned Erickson, right, one of the foremost, people in the field, getting them to think about, oh yeah, I should be mentioning this person, right? And then stages of development, right? So, they have to think about those different stages, and then cognitive and social emotional development, get them thinking about the relationship between those, and it helps them understand the level and the depth of a response that we're looking for. And then the what if question, what happens if as a society, right, some children are hampered at a particular stage, right? So, and I remind them, you don't have to answer all the questions, right? See if anyone else is, and having a conversation about what you're interested in, and join in there. And so this leads to some really interesting discussions, or it could, but with the current structure of post and reply to discussions, most students don't feel like they have learning choice, a choice of their learning, and they don't have really substantive conversations. There's no distributed teaching among learners, and they feel very little freedom. Because in the post and reply to discussion, the instructor posts a question, right? They put it in the topic description, and then each student posts a homework style response. And so their student A, and student B, each student is creating their answer by themselves without any input from anyone else. And so this leads to this sort of fragmentary engagement, or these monologues, if some researchers have called them, because there's not that back and forth discussion. So think about in the classroom, right? So our classroom discussions are great. So there's an instructor prompt, student A answers, but when student B responds, right, they're not answering the question as if A said nothing, right? They're answering the question and in light of what A said. And same with student C, they're not just answering the question, they're thinking about and adding to what A and B said. And student D, the same thing, they might summarize or disagree or whatever. And then at a certain point, the instructor, redirects the conversation, or, asks a scaffolding prompt or something. And so that's what happens in the classroom, and we know that really engages students' interest. But that's a quite different structure than typical online. But we can model that online. So instead of the instructor prompt being up in the topic description, the instructor can start the thread and each student responds. So after the first student A responds to part of the prompt, student B is commenting on what A says, acknowledging it in some way, and then adding, information. So these are instructions for my freshman level class, right, where I tell them, you need to add, analyze, apply information for a AAA post. But upper level students, they will jump into synthesis and evaluation and stuff like that. They get it right away that this is a more natural conversational style, and it fits in with what they understand. And so eventually the instructor is asking another scaffolding prompt after summarizing the work. So Amy, Denise, Jen, Matthew, great work in this conversation. I like, Harry, how you, did this or that in the conversation. You really pointed out the value of whatever, right? So you're mentioning student names, summarizing what's been said, sort of tying it together. And then you're starting sort of a new or an additional conversation to deepen or broaden it. And so this is what you can do online that models the classroom conversational style. And so you can see the difference is in the structure. Instead of each student starting their own thread or monologue, the instructor can start 2 or 3 threads, one for each sort of theme in the class. So you can cover a lot more material. Your discussions are much less repetitive because you're not all 40 students trying to talk about one thing. You're covering different areas, and each student receives instructions about adding new material. So here are the student instructions, and they're really pretty simple, right? After the first student responds to me, you respond to each other. And to keep the conversation going, right, after you read my initial questions and peer responses, you find some classmate you want to respond to, and you click respond to their post. So you're not starting a new thread. You use the classmate's name, and that's really important for community building. You summarize or comment on it, and then you're sharing your new information, what you want to add to the conversation. And then sign your name and adjust the subject line, because sometimes someone takes the conversation in a slightly different direction, and it's nice to have those subject lines change. So I remind students, in an announcement, that the goal here is to have a great conversation, just like you would in the classroom, and to apply what you're learning. So you should definitely be learning while you're writing. This is not a busy work activity. If you haven't learned while you wrote, then go back to the textbook or go back to your readings and learn something and share it with us. And then you should then be learning when you're reading your peers' posts. The prompts are there to inspire great conversations, not to limit it. So if you've got something that you want to add into the conversation that's not part of the question, you are invited to do so, right? So that gives them that freedom within this structure, because my goal is not to assess whether they read the chapter. I gave them a quiz for that, right? My goal is to engage them, to get them excited, to share my passion about the topic, and to have that learning happen just like in the classroom. I remind them, answer only one of my prompts, not all of them, because occasionally you will get a student who wants to answer every single thing. And that makes the conversation, it sort of limits, it sort of ties down because, oh, everything's been answered. So if I get a student like that, I'll just email and talk about how brilliant they are and how thorough and so on. And that I want to open the discussion for everyone to have, and so they can email me their posts. And students are often very understanding about that. And then some students won't come in until the weekend, for a week-long discussion. And so I let them know, skim the other stuff, but I will ask questions throughout the week, sort of adding to the conversation, adding to the thread. So not adding new threads, but adding new prompts. And so, come down there and there'll be a lot more for you to talk about. It won't all have been covered already. I have this little image here at the bottom, and students really relate to this. I said, well, it's sort of like academic gossip. So, in gossip, it's, oh, did you hear? And someone said, well, yeah, but, and, right? And I said, we're doing the same thing, but it's with the textbook. Well, did you read this? And this was really cool because, right? And that they really relate to, they get that. I also provide students with conversation starters and sample posts. So, and these starters work for any kind of discussion, and a lot of other faculty have used them and find that students really find them helpful. So how to comment on someone else's work, and then how to add new material. And I like the last two there, well, I'm confused. So letting students know it's okay to be confused, but they still have to share something that they know and then help. Or, well, why you said this, I disagree, right? So these students find these really helpful. And I also share free sample posts, with a little bit about why it's really good and so on. So what's your role in all this? Well, your presence is absolutely essential in the discussions to promote critical thinking. All the research shows that if the faculty member's just in there, even just making posts like, great job, or I appreciate your hard work, sort of general posts like that, anything that lets the students know that they're reading the post, the critical thinking level goes up. But if instructors then model critical thinking by asking these scaffolding questions, and I'll give you some details on that later, then the critical thinking is increased yet again. So faculty can come in, ask those scaffolding questions, direct the conversation, sort of redirect, summarize, provide meaning. So some students really sort of take the conversation quite to the outer limits. And so you can help provide some meaning and sort of bring that back around. Share your teaching stories that convey your passion and your excitement for the topic. This is what the discussions look like in the grid view of D2L, and I think most of you are D2L users, so I thought it would be worth showing you this. So you can see all of the lesson discussions for the course are on the left-hand side. And so it's really helpful for this discussion style if you pin your post, the instructor pins their post, and there's just a little checkbox below when you're editing that just says pin post. And that keeps your post to the top of the discussion. This helps especially in the beginning because a few students will still start their own threads, but those will at least go down to the bottom of the discussion. Also, grid view is really helpful. There's some research that shows that any kind of visual representation of the discussion, like grid view, really decreases students' extraneous cognitive load so that they can then focus on the discussion. So I give instructions to all my students how to view the discussions in grid view. You can do it in reading view, which is probably what most of you are used to, but the grid view actually helps them make connections between what different people have said. So that's some interesting research from Wise and her colleagues. So all of this is sort of based on that meaning is based on this social constructivist model, right? Where students learn by interacting with others, negotiating meaning, and considering multiple perspective. And some initial research suggests that this really works. In the spring, short session 1, so the first half, while we still had proctored exams, I compared the proctored exams from students in my class using these organic classroom style discussion to 3 sections using regular discussions. And the score on the midterm, it's a proctored midterm, they were 8 points higher. And that was statistically significant. And so you can argue about what tests measure and do they test learning at all, but there's clearly something going on there. And I think that it's, in part because it's a natural conversational style. Everyone knows how to have a conversation, and it works for them. Another reason why they might have scored higher is Wise and her colleagues up in Canada. They do some really great research on discussions, and they did some research and they found that post depth is predicted by the percentage of posts read, not scanned, but read. And so reading and rereading posts benefits the quality of the post, and the organic online discussion model really nudges students to, they have to read other posts in order not to repeat information. They have to at least summarize or comment on, so they have to read it well enough to do that. So they're reading more posts, and maybe the graphic representation also helps, but definitely some further research will be needed to better understand. But it looks like they're increasing their level of intellectual engagement. You can use scaffolding prompts, in any discussion. In the post and reply to 2 discussion, if a professor asks a scaffolding kind of question, asking the student to clarify assumptions or reasons or viewpoints or something like that, that student and any other students who read it will benefit. But that's only just a handful of students. But with this organic discussion model, right, any scaffolding prompt impacts the whole discussion. And so that really helps the whole class sort of see how you can think critically about the topic at hand. And there was something else there, but it just flew out the window. Maybe I better close those windows. Sorry. So role playing, same thing with role playing. Week 1 and 2, if you try this new model, it's definitely helpful to, give them a week or 2 to sort of get used to it. And, they will, there'll be a little of who moved my cheese and why do I have to do it this way? But by week 2, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. In week 3, they're in love with it and they're participating, and it's really works out really well. And so that's a time you might want to start maybe assigning some roles, having students play the role of a skeptic or a validator, challenger, not only increases their critical thinking in the class, but it helps them develop a critical thinking disposition, which is really, really helpful. And I'm sorry I'm missing the reference here, but if you are interested, I've got the reference. And the same with metacognitive work. If you're asking students to go an extra step to get them even more involved in the discussions, it benefits the whole class because everyone's seeing what was fun.
How are you today, sir?
Excuse me, someone please mute your mic. I think maybe you didn't realize that you were sharing your conversation. So I have found that with these organic style discussions, that there's just endless possibilities of what you can do in the online classroom. The students are definitely, they're engaged with the material, they're engaged with each other. Even freshmen and sophomores recognize, oh wow, this is like, we're learning from each other here. And I actually have had a student, email me like, Oh, wow. I didn't know discussions could be like this. And I get the same responses from faculty who have tried it. They say, oh, for the first time, I feel like discussions are a relevant learning tool in my online class. My
Can you hear me
students
now?
have, yep, I can still hear you. You can, what was I saying? That students even have emailed them commenting that, oh, this new style discussion really is interesting and it works. On my own campus, when I use this in a graduate class, and a faculty, the student went and talked to the dean and said, how come all our discussions aren't like this, right? Like, this is the way it should be, because it's a natural conversational style, and it's a very simple change to go from, it's just the instructor starting the posts and the threads, and then, responding to each other, adding new information, and so on. So we'd like to hear a little bit from you about what you've sort of learned, or what you might have thought about from our presentation that you might try, or, a technique you might try, or questions you have, so that, or ideas you have about active learning, something you'd like to learn more about, because this was only, it was only 45 minutes. We have a handout for you, which we can also jump to. Oops. Oh, where did that slide go? Here we go. The presentation handout. Or Amy, can you post that link maybe in the chat?
I sure can. Give me just a second.
And we've also shared the eCampus Flexible Teaching Resource Center. That has a lot of information. So I'm going to see if I can see the discussions here.
Beth René, there were some questions in the chat a little earlier when you were talking about the kind of the new structure for discussions. And some folks were curious about if this works for large classes, if you break it down into smaller groups.
Yes, so this so I'm not really sure where the questions started here, but this technique works in an asynchronous online discussion, Hale, absolutely. And so it really, that's how I've always used it. And, so it's not for like a Zoom kind of meeting. Oh, thank you, Denise, you got that one already. Oh, so I'm not constantly in the discussion board. So Emily, I go in, so if my discussion's in an 8-week class, I go in, so it's they last a week. And so I go in 3 or 4 times a week. So I've posted the questions to get them started. And then, let's say it starts on Monday or something. And then, Wednesday I'll go in again. There'll be some posts, and maybe I'll respond to a few of them. And then I'll go in again on Friday and maybe Saturday. And I'm just, I am only asking maybe one new scaffolding, in each one, and a little bit of summary. But I find that it saves me a lot of time, because I'm responding to groups of students. I always use their names, so they all feel really engaged. They participate more because they want more. They want those mentions. They want those positive mentions in front of the class. Great job on, presenting us or sharing this information in this way. And towards the end of the term, when I'm frantically busy, they carry on quite well with very, I'm still in there, but they carry on quite well. And so, yeah, so Jackie, the students love this. Although at first, they definitely say at first that, oh, why'd you move my cheese? Why do we have to do that? Nicole, I've also tried breaking, in D2L, it's really easy to break your class into 2 groups. So I only have, 15 to 20 students in a group. And that is definitely, I would agree, that's better. And it's no more work for me if you have both groups in the same discussion. So I can see, the different posts. But I've done it with 50 students, and it still works pretty well.
Okay, it took a minute, but I finally was able to share the link. Sorry for the delay. Do you guys see it?
We do.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So if you have, Megan, when you have over 100 students, you could break them up into like 4 groups. And again, with D2L, I'm assuming you're using, you can see all of the discussions, in one discussion. So you don't have to sort of go into 4 different areas. And often I'm copying, you know, my question into the same for discussions, and then just adding, you know, the personal comments about summarizing what other classmates have said. Nicole, I'm not sure I understand your question about, yeah, so you would have to post the initial prompts in multiple groups, but you can, in D2L, if your groups are in the same discussion, when I create that post, I can just say share to all groups, and it shares it to all groups. So you don't have to, again, you don't have to go in individually. And so prompting them through throughout the discussions, I think, well, I just answered that. So maybe you didn't see well, maybe you missed it. So I go in maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I read the posts that have been made since I was there last. I summarize, you know, some of them, but not all of them. Maybe I'll save some for the next time I'm in. And so I find I spend less time in the discussions this way, and I respond to more students.
Do you see the next question, Beth René, about do you grade all of them? And if you do, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I do grade them. In the first 2 weeks. I spend a lot of time on grading. I do, but I use templates for improvements. But I will mention every single student, you know, dear, you know, Amy, excellent job in the, you know, your first discussion post. I like how you said this, or I like your response to this. It really helped open up the discussion. I mentioned something very specific, and that is a positive reinforcement tool that really works to encourage participation and encourage, you know, positive things. And then I do use template or I can't remember what else, you know, but sort of, you know, to earn a higher grade next time, you know, you'll need to respond to 2 students, or you know, to earn a higher, whatever they need to do. So for the improvements, I'll use some I can't think of the word, template, and I'll just edit it a little bit to fit that particular student. And then again, by the 3rd week out of an 8-week term, I provide hardly any feedback other than I note something good that they said, and most students are doing really well.
And you use a rubric for that, right?
I do. I use a rubric, and it's in the handout, and I've got the announcements and so on for, you know, for information you want to share it. And if you want to contact me, there's nothing I like to talk about more than discussions.
She's telling you the truth there. For sure.
Oh, and the deadlines, this past term I used a rubric that if they made their first post by Wednesday, they got some more points. You know, so that to keep it from all going on the end. And another thing I do is I make the deadline on Friday. So then you're more likely to get students going in during the weekend who only have the weekends to work, you know, for example. So that really helped.
If you guys want, please feel free to unmute your microphones to ask questions too.
Beth René, Scott is asking if you have any live Q&A sessions on Blackboard Ultra.
I have for my asynchronous classes, I've hosted some live sessions, but fewer students sign up because they signed up for an online, you know, class. But I know that after COVID, more students who are taking online classes maybe want that. So I will offer them again in the spring when I teach in January.
Thank you. My name's Scott. Hi. This is a great topic. I love it. I was excited to see this one come out, and I really appreciate everything you're sharing with us. And it's just, my question was just because I'm experimenting with some different ideas, and I've actually been astounded by the participation. I'm just throwing it out randomly on weekends or days, and when I have free time or office hours, and engaging students. But the conversations have really spiraled way out on the topics farther than I've ever experienced with any discussion board or anything. And people are bringing in their personal experiences to a lot of the topics. I was wondering if any you or anyone else has tried this, or if there's any other means to kind of facilitate a furthering of this, you know, than just asking for it in discussions. They seem to want the engagement, especially now when everybody's trapped in their houses.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it better.
Yeah, I mean, they do, and so I'm guessing I'll see an increase in that. Previous other professors have said the same thing, that students don't show up to these synchronous sessions, but in this sort of conversational style discussion, students definitely are bringing in sort of personal things, and but appropriately personal, but there's a lot more engagement that I've ever seen in a sort of post and reply to two, because that other stuff, they see it as busy work. It's like a homework, and then they have to comment, and it's not worth very many points. So good job, Steve. And that's sort of the extent of it.
I also incorporate synchronous sessions in my asynchronous courses, just as a way to get the class together and just to get them engaged with each other. And to let them know too, I'm here if you have any questions, that kind of thing. And then depending on the class, so if I'm teaching accounting or finance, that's a great opportunity. If they've missed, the mark on, say, an exam, and they all seem to be struggling with the same thing, I definitely will offer a synchronous session to kind of go over materials and help the students, and reinforce the content. So I find that to be helpful as well.
Thank you. Terrific. Great idea. I'm kind of doing the same thing to expand the lectures and let them ask questions before the assignments are due too. And I found that the students that first engage, a lot of them have been non-traditional students too. They want that extra experience, have fostered an internal learning group, then from their conversations keep spiraling it. So I think it's an interesting concept, especially when you can just expand before they turn something in and have question and answer to eliminate some of the redundancies and problems that do happen. I really like that idea. You're doing a terrific idea. Fantastic.
Yeah. I think it also helps them understand too, at the end of the day, we want them to succeed. So
100%.
The goal is not to trap you when it's for you to fail. We want you to do well. So, come with your questions. We can work these problems together, kind of thing. And I think they enjoy that.
I agree. Job security is wonderful, but I don't want to see them back. I get better job security when they get great jobs and promote us.
Exactly.
Personally.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Awesome. Everyone.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you guys coming. And again, we've included a link so that you can get a tip sheet and just some strategies for what you can do to incorporate, some things into your asynchronous courses. And then here's our contact information. If you need to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. We appreciate you.
And I just want to say that what you guys are talking about here, even if you all are doing hybrid courses, like good online design like this, it's going to work whether you're completely online or if you're hybrid, if you're going to be doing more face-to-face time in the spring, like these ideas still very much hold. Like this is just good design for your online components, whether it's completely online or just a part of your course. And I think Amy and Beth René are just really, really great at helping us think through some of these things. So we really appreciate both of you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Anytime.
Thank you.
And we'll stick around for a few minutes. Yeah, we'll stick around for a few minutes if there's any other questions.
There was an unanswered comment. I can't remember. It's scrolled up so far. I don't know who said it, but I was just talking about the resistance and the amount of work. And I would agree that there's definitely resistance the first week, especially. But I've found that holding fast, you just say, well, give it a try and see what happens. Because they have to think harder in an active learning classroom, whether it's active learning, assignments or discussions or something like that. But I find that once you set it up, a lot of these active learning exercises, that it's not more work for the instructor. It's in fact less work because the students, it's more student centered, as Amy was talking about. And so they, once you get them a little training those first few weeks when you don't have a lot of grading to do, then they sort of take it on.
And I think one of the challenges is helping them understand that active learning. So we have to help them understand that we're not taking time off from our jobs and making them teach themselves, which is what I hear a lot, that the reason we're having you do this is because it makes you a better learner. Like you will understand this information better, and you're not out there alone learning this stuff. You've got the support of your instructors. But if, I think it was Terry Doyle, I can't remember the name of his book, but he said, whoever does the work does the learning. And I think about that all the time. Like, am I doing the learning for my students, or am I helping them do the work so that they do the learning? And it can be a very different paradigm for those who are used to a lecture class, take notes, multiple choice tests. But if we really want to dig in and help them learn, then they have to do the work.
Right. That's right.
Hi, I have a quick question for the Beth René. You said you research about the role playing and then the discussion. I really like that. I think I very enjoyed your presentation. I was wondering if you have some article came out of that, your experimentation. Can you share with us?
Yeah, so I know that I've read the article that talks about the critical thinking disposition, but I don't remember it right now. It's probably in the references, but if you can email me, I will send it to you. So that, and then my research, I have not published it yet. There'll be a chapter coming out in the spring that talks a little bit about it. And I'm hoping to do some more research, soon. I'd like to do some analysis, to look at the level of critical thinking and so on. And so that'll be my next steps. But if you email me at this email address right here, broepnack@ecampus.usg.edu, I will email you that link about the critical thinking dispositions.
Thank you.
Hey, Beth René, quick question. I know we're at KSU, we're in like week 8 or going into week 8. What do you think about trying this semester, or do you think it's best to wait and start it at the beginning of a semester, the organic discussion format?
Yeah. You'll probably get more resistance halfway through, but you could sort of say, well, based on the midterm grades, and which are usually maybe not as good as everyone wanted, I'm going to try this new way of having discussions that should help you learn more. And, it might take a little getting used to the first week or two, but, please stick with me and we'll learn this together. So I think that could work at the halfway mark.
That's great. Thank you.
Emily makes an interesting point here. She says that students think that it's not the same, and it's not. Face-to-face is not the same as online, but it is just as valuable. So we just have to work hard at making sure we, design our courses and we create activities where they can see, okay, put just as much effort into this as I would have had to put into it if I were face-to-face with the instructor. So definitely a good point.
Yeah. And I think Monica's point is good. You do a midterm evaluation, and then this can be part of your feedback.
Yep, absolutely.
And this is being recorded, Denise?
It is. Yep.
Excellent.
So we're right at time.
Someone just asked.
Okay, thank you. As always, these recordings will be up on our website at the same place that I'm going to drop it in the link here in a sec. Drop the link in the chat here in a sec. But in the same place where you registered, that's where you can go to see the archive materials. So it will be there by Monday morning, by Monday, if not before. Sometimes I actually get them up on the day of, but just be patient. And that's where they will show up by the end of Monday, along with whatever resources that Beth René and Amy share.
And I think someone asked me in the chat for the slides. The slides will also be there. I think it was Rosa.
Yep, our presenters have been very generous in sharing their materials with us. All right, well, thanks everyone. We hope to see you for the next webinar. Check out that link that I put in the chat. I'm gonna put it in there again. to see what future webinars we have coming up. And we're going to actually add a couple more on the calendar before too long. Hopefully next week they'll be on the calendar for some more hybrid focused webinars. So hope to see you then. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.